the 2022 Qatar World Cup. For over a decade, it's been the ultimate symbol of a broken system. A tournament hosted by a tiny desert nation with a modest record on the world stage, awarded under a mountain of controversy and built on a scale of human suffering that's hard to wrap your head around. For years, we've called it the biggest mistake in FIFA's history, a moment of supreme unapologetic corruption. But what if I told you that giving the World Cup to Qatar wasn't the biggest mistake? What if it was just the inevitable, logical conclusion of a much bigger, much older decision? A single institutional failure from decades earlier that set the stage not just for Qatar, but for everything that came after it. This is the story of the original sin that truly broke the World Cup. A story that starts not in the air-conditioned boardrooms of 2010, but in the political turmoil of the 1970s. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the moment FIFA stopped being a simple governing body for football and started its journey to becoming a corrupt multi-billion-dollar empire. The original sin. The birth of commercial corruption. Before the scandals, the arrests and the global outrage, FIFA was a pretty quiet, Eurocentric and almost amateur outfit. For most of its history, it was led by guys like Sir Stanley Rouse, an old-school English administrator. But by 1974, the world was changing. Decolonisation had created dozens of new nations, especially in Africa and Asia, and each one came with a new vote in the FIFA Congress. One man saw this not as a political shift, but as a political opportunity. His name was João Havelange. Havelange was a Brazilian businessman who ran for the FIFA presidency with a revolutionary promise. He looked at all these new national federations and saw a clear path to power. He actually went and visited these countries, making personal connections with voters who had never even seen a FIFA representative before. He promised them more inclusion, more funding, and most importantly, a bigger World Cup, a tournament where they would finally get a real shot at competing. It was a brilliant political strategy with one giant problem. It was incredibly expensive. To pay for all this, Havelange needed cash, and lots of it. He found his answer in a man named Horst Dassler, the heir to the Adidas fortune. Dassler was a marketing visionary. He knew that the real power in sports wasn't just on the field, it was in the intersection of sponsors, TV rights, and personal connections. Before the 1974 election, Dassler's team reportedly worked behind the scenes, making deals to make sure delegates would vote for the Brazilian. When Havelange won, a new alliance was born, one that would change football forever. Together, Havelange and Dassler completely overhauled FIFA's financial model. Before them, sponsorship was an afterthought. After them, it became the engine driving the whole organisation. They pioneered the idea of exclusive sponsorship rights, convincing giants like Coca-Cola that the World Cup was the ultimate marketing platform. Pepsi hesitated, Coca-Cola jumped in and became a key FIFA partner. And not surprisingly, Adidas became a major partner, often supplying the official match balls and other equipment. This new model was all about creating scarcity to drive up value. At the top were FIFA partners with exclusive global rights. But the real game changer was television. Dassler and a business partner set up a media company called International Sport and Leisure, or ISL. Through his personal relationship with Havelange, ISL was granted the sole rights to sell World Cup TV packages around the globe. This one decision created a fire hose of cash that flowed straight into FIFA, giving Havelange the money he needed to deliver on his promises and lock down his power. And that was the institutional failure. It wasn't a single vote or a shady deal. It was the creation of a system where the World Cup's commercial value was permanently tied to the FIFA president's political power. Havelange now had a massive war chest, which he used to run a global patronage network. Money from sponsors and TV deals was sent to national federations through development programs, basically buying their loyalty. A vote for Havelange became a vote for new soccer fields, coaching courses, and a slice of the World Cup's growing riches. The system was practically designed for corruption because the lines between business and governance were intentionally blurred. Horst Dassler didn't just sell marketing, he built relationships. He offered access to the highest levels of FIFA, and in doing so, he created a marketplace where influence was the hottest commodity. Officials became powerful because they controlled that access, which was worth millions. This is how the business of football got so dirty. The very structure Havelange and Dassler built, a president with centralized power funded by exclusive commercial deals who keeps everyone loyal with money, was the original mistake. It created a culture where votes weren't just cast. They were cultivated, bought, and sold. The system is exploited. The Blatter era and the ISL scandal. The machine built by Havelange and Dassler needed an operator. It found the perfect one in a young Swiss administrator who knew the system inside and out, Joseph Sepp Blatter. Before becoming FIFA's general secretary and then president, Blatter had worked under Horst Dassler's guidance. He understood better than anyone that in this new FIFA, money, power and favours were all interchangeable. When Blatter became president in 1998, he inherited the patronage system and took it to a whole new level. His own election victory reportedly followed the familiar playbook. One account from that night describes a frantic scene of last-minute deals and envelopes of cash being passed around to secure votes for Blatter. It was the Havelange model, just bigger and badder. But the seeds of corruption planted in the 70s were already starting to rot. The company that made FIFA rich, International Sport and Leisure, ISL, had basically become a shadow bank for bribes. For years, ISL had been making secret payments to top football officials to lock in those lucrative marketing and television rights. These weren't just handshake deals. A Swiss court would later reveal that between 1992 and 2000, ISL paid at least 41 million Swiss francs in bribes to officials, including Jaume Havelange himself. This was the system working exactly as intended. Commercial rights were sold, a cut of the money was secretly funneled back to the officials who granted those rights, and the whole cycle just kept spinning. But the scheme got too big. After Horst Dassler's death, ISL spiraled, overextending itself with massive deals it couldn't finance. A pattern of risky deals and financial mismanagement caught up to them. In May 2001, ISL collapsed, going bankrupt with debts reported to be around $300 million. The collapse threatened to expose the entire rotten structure. FIFA itself initially filed a criminal complaint against ISL, but in a very telling move, later withdrew it, preferring to keep the details buried. It took years of work from investigative journalists to finally drag the truth into the light. The ISL scandal was the first undeniable proof that the business model that made FIFA rich was also fundamentally corrupt. It showed that senior figures at the very top were taking bribes. And the response? Sepp Blatter not only survived, he consolidated his power. When members of his own executive committee tried to file a complaint against him for financial mismanagement, it was thrown out. This was a critical moment. The system was exposed and it didn't matter. The lesson FIFA's power brokers learned wasn't that corruption was wrong, but that it needed to be hidden better. A culture of impunity took hold. Officials knew they could take kickbacks for marketing rights, or, even better, for the biggest prize of all, the right to host a World Cup. Rumours of bribery around World Cup bids had been swirling for years. Chuck Blazer, a high-ranking American FIFA executive who later became an FBI informant, admitted that he and other officials took bribes for the 1998 and 2010 World Cup decisions. The 2010 World Cup, awarded to South Africa, allegedly involved a $10 million payment described by US prosecutors as a bribe to secure key votes, though South African officials have always maintained it was development aid. The ISL bankruptcy should have been a death blow. Instead, it was a dress rehearsal. The organization learned how to absorb a scandal, protect its key players, and just keep going. The institutional mistake from the 70s had now created an organization that seemed immune to reform. The stage was perfectly set for the most brazen act of corruption in sports history. This system of patronage and power, built over decades, is what made the next chapter possible. It's easy to blame the individuals, but it's the system that allowed them to flourish. If you're finding this look into the hidden history of FIFA interesting, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We dig into the stories that explain how the beautiful game is really run, and you won't want to miss what's next. Now, let's get to the point of no return. The point of no return. The 2018 and 2022. Decision on December 2nd, 2010, the football world watched as Sepp Blatter announced the hosts for 2 World Cups at once. Russia for 2018 and, in a moment of absolute shock, Qatar for 2022. This decision wasn't just controversial, it was the explosive finale of the corrupt system that had been built and perfected over the last 40 years. The Qatar bid especially defied all logic. It was a country with scorching summer heat that made playing football dangerous and had never qualified for a World Cup. While it had a domestic league and had hosted other tournaments, it was up against bids from powerhouse football nations like the United States and Australia. On paper, it was a non-starter. But Qatar had one thing the others couldn't compete with: money. And in the FIFA that Havelange and Blatter built, money was the only thing that mattered. The decision was immediately hit with allegations of bribery. Investigations by journalists and eventually law enforcement uncovered a massive web of corruption. The US Department of Justice would later release indictments alleging that several FIFA Executive Committee members had been bribed in connection with their votes for both Russia and Qatar. This wasn't just speculation anymore. This was the moment the whole house of cards collapsed in public. On May 27th, 2015, the world woke up to stunning news. Acting on a huge investigation by the FBI and IRS, Swiss police raided a luxury hotel in Zurich and arrested 7 high-ranking FIFA officials. They were charged as part of a US indictment alleging a 24-year scheme of racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering, totaling over $150 million in bribes. This wasn't just about World Cup bids. The corruption was everywhere, from marketing deals to sponsorships. But the 2018 and 2022 votes were the trigger that brought it all crashing down. The scale of it all was just breathtaking. More than 24 officials and marketing executives were implicated. The investigation laid bare how FIFA had been turned into a corrupt enterprise, where TV contracts, marketing rights, and World Cup hosting rights were all for sale. The system created by Havelange and perfected by Blatter had hit its endgame. It wasn't a hidden mechanism of influence anymore, it was an open auction, and the consequences went far beyond money. Awarding the World Cup to Qatar will forever be remembered as a moral catastrophe. The tournament was built on the backs of migrant workers facing horrific exploitation. Human rights organizations criticized the thousands of unexplained deaths of workers from countries like Nepal, India, and Bangladesh in Qatar in the decade leading up to the tournament. These were men who had their passports confiscated and their safety ignored under the oppressive kafala system, with many deaths attributed to working in extreme heat. This was the true cost of FIFA's original sin. The decision to prioritize money and power over everything else led directly to a moment where human lives were treated as a disposable cost of business. Similarly, the 2018 Russia World Cup is often cited as a prime example of sports washing, using a massive sporting event to distract from a country's authoritarian policies and human rights record. The system that once promised to democratize football was now being used to empower and legitimize autocratic regimes. The 2015 arrests were a thermonuclear event for FIFA. Sepp Blatter, once the untouchable king of world football, was suspended and eventually banned. Dozens of officials were indicted. The world saw, in ugly detail, that FIFA had become a deeply corrupt organization. And yet, the core argument of this video remains: the Qatar vote wasn't the mistake. It was just the most obvious symptom of a disease that had been festering for 40 years. Conclusion: the iceberg revealed. So let's circle back. Was Qatar the biggest mistake? No. It was the invoice. It was the bill coming due for decades of institutional rot. The single biggest mistake FIFA ever made was the decision back in the 1970s to build its entire model on a corruptible bargain, fusing absolute political power with exclusive commercial rights. It was the creation of a system where the FIFA president could use a fire hose of sponsorship money to buy loyalty, creating a culture of patronage that made accountability impossible. That structural flaw is the iceberg. Everything else is just the tip. The ISL scandal was the first big crack in the ice. The 2010 vote for South Africa, allegedly secured with a bribe, was a tremor. And the dual award to Russia and Qatar was the moment the whole corrupt structure broke through the surface for everyone to see. The human rights crisis in Qatar and the sports washing in Russia were the direct tragic results. And the fallout is still shaping football today. Take the 2026 World Cup, the expansion to 48 teams, a move that risks watering down the tournament's quality, is a complex decision born from this history. While FIFA promotes it as a move for global inclusion, it's also a clear commercial play to generate more games and more revenue to keep the machine fed, especially after the financial hit from the 2015 scandal. FIFA's new leadership has brought in reforms for transparency and governance. But the very fact that FIFA now promotes its transformation away from a toxic organization is an admission of what it used to be. The story of FIFA is a cautionary tale about what happens when an organization loses its way. No, it's about what happens when the drive for money and power becomes more important than the integrity of the game and the dignity of people. The original mistake wasn't a single vote. It was the creation of a system that made that vote almost inevitable. The question we should be asking now is not what the last mistake was, but whether FIFA has truly done enough to prevent the next one. What do you think? Was there an even bigger mistake in FIFA's history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more deep dives that connect the dots between sports, money, and power, make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching.